Nicole Kidman has made her first public appearance since her split from Keith Urban.
We've been through a lot together.
We've got a timeline for it now, and the time it's now.
For nearly 20 years, the world watched Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban as Hollywood's proof that fame and love could survive together. Now the marriage is over, the court papers are public, and the story fans thought they knew looks very different in the cold light of legal documents and confirmed reporting. This is what we actually know, why the ending looked the way it did, and why the real story is more interesting than the rumors. Nicole Kidman filed for divorce from Keith Urban in September 2025, ending a marriage that began in 2006. The filing listed September 30th as the official date of separation and cited irreconcilable differences, the standard legal language used when a marriage cannot be repaired but neither side is publicly alleging misconduct. What made headlines wasn't the reason given, since irreconcilable differences tells us almost nothing on its own, but the speed and quiet efficiency of the filing itself. Court records show the two had already reached a marital dissolution agreement before the paperwork became public, meaning the terms of their split had been worked out privately, away from lawyers arguing in front of cameras. That detail alone says something about how this divorce differed from many celebrity splits. There was no messy public fight over money or custody playing out in real time. Instead, there was a finished agreement filed all at once and finalized within a few months. That agreement laid out a clear parenting plan for their two daughters, Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret. Kidman was named the primary residential parent, with the girls scheduled to spend roughly 306 days a year with her and 59 days with Urban. Both parents retained joint decision-making authority over major issues like education and healthcare, meaning neither parent gave up a say in how their daughters are raised, even though the day-to-day living arrangement favors Kidman. Both Kidman and Urban also waived spousal support and child support, though the filing noted Urban had already prepaid certain child support obligations. Legal analysts who reviewed the filing pointed to language suggesting the couple had a prenuptial agreement, since each retained their own separate assets rather than dividing shared property in the way divorcing couples without a prenup typically must. Attorneys who commented on the case in the press noted that reaching a full settlement before the initial filing is relatively unusual for a marriage of this length and public profile, and it suggests both sides wanted to avoid the kind of drawn-out litigation that so often turns celebrity divorces into a second, separate media event. In early January 2026, the divorce was formally finalized, closing out a marriage that had spanned nearly 2 decades. To understand why this ending surprised so many people, it helps to go back to how the marriage began, because on paper, Kidman and Urban always seemed like an unlikely pairing that somehow made sense. Kidman was born in Honolulu in 1967 to Australian parents who were living abroad at the time, and the family returned to Sydney while she was still young. She trained in ballet and drama as a child, moved into youth theatre, and broke into acting as a teenager in Australian film and television, appearing in local productions before Hollywood took notice by the late 1980s. Her rise coincided with meeting Tom Cruise, and the two married in 1990, becoming one of the most photographed couples in the world at the time. During that marriage, she and Cruise adopted 2 children, Isabella and Connor. When the marriage ended in 2001, custody of the children remained primarily with Cruise, an outcome Kidman has referenced publicly over the years as one of the most difficult periods of her life. In the years that followed, she rebuilt her career on her own terms, and her performance in The Hours earned her the Academy Award for Best Actress in 2003, cementing her reputation as one of the most respected actresses of her generation. By the time she met Keith Urban 2 years later, she had gone through a very public divorce and a very public professional resurgence in the same stretch of time. Keith Urban's path to that same year looked completely different. Born in New Zealand in 1967 and raised in Queensland, Australia, Urban picked up the guitar as a young child, encouraged by a father who loved country music despite it being far from mainstream in Australia at the time. He was performing publicly by the age of 6, and by his teenage years he was playing talent shows and small venues while building both his sound and his stage presence. He eventually left school to pursue music full-time, a decision that left him with no real backup plan if the career didn't work out. He moved to Nashville in the early 1990s to chase a bigger stage, spending years working the circuit before his self-titled American debut album broke through in 1999. That album turned him into one of country music's rising stars, known for his guitar playing as much as his voice. Alongside that success, Urban has spoken openly in later interviews about struggling with substance use during those years, including stints in treatment before he and Kidman ever met. By the time the two crossed paths, he was an established name in country music but was also someone who had already lived through public reporting on his personal struggles. The two met at the Day USA Gala in Los Angeles in January 2005, an event built around celebrating Australians working in the American entertainment industry. Kidman has said in past interviews that their connection wasn't instant. Urban was polite but reserved when they were introduced, and it took several months before he reached out to her again after they exchanged information. Once the relationship did begin, it moved quickly by any standard. They were photographed together publicly within months, appeared at events together by the end of that year, and were married in a ceremony in Sydney in June 2006, roughly a year and a half after they first met. Their wedding drew a mix of Hollywood and country music figures, and the pairing was covered at the time as a fairly unlikely but charming match between two Australians who had each built entirely different careers on opposite sides of the entertainment industry. The early years of the marriage were not smooth, and this part is well documented rather than speculative. Just months after the wedding, Urban entered rehab for alcohol abuse, a fact he has confirmed and discussed openly in interviews over the years since, including describing Kidman's support during that period as significant to his recovery. The couple stayed together through that early crisis and went on to have two daughters, Sunday Rose, born in 2008, and Faith Margaret, born via gestational surrogate in 2010. For the next roughly 15 years, the two maintained demanding, separate careers that required extended time apart. Kidman continued to take on major film and television roles across multiple countries, balancing large studio projects with smaller, critically acclaimed work, while Urban toured extensively as one of country music's most consistent headline acts, releasing multiple albums and collecting several Grammy Awards along the way. In interviews across those years, both spoke publicly about the deliberate effort required to keep a marriage functioning across two demanding, travel-heavy careers, referencing rules like limiting how long they would go without seeing each other and prioritizing family time whenever possible. What actually led to the breakdown of the marriage in 2025 has not been detailed publicly by either party, and it's worth being direct about that rather than filling the gap with speculation the way so much of the online coverage has. Neither Kidman nor Urban has given a detailed public account of what specifically ended the relationship, and no verified statement from either of them lays out a single cause. What is known is limited to the public record: the date of separation, the terms of the settlement, and the fact that both sides moved through the legal process without a public fight. In interviews given before the split became public, Urban had spoken about the personal toll of touring, describing long stretches on the road as isolating at times, a comment some outlets later connected to the marriage's end. Whether that reflects directly on the relationship or simply on the ordinary pressures of a touring musician's life is not something either of them has confirmed, and viewers should be cautious about treating an interview clip taken out of its original context as evidence of what happened behind closed doors. In the weeks following the divorce announcement, media coverage focused heavily on Urban's public appearances, particularly the absence of his wedding ring during tour stops, which was widely photographed and interpreted by entertainment outlets as a visual signal that the marriage was truly over. Some outlets also reported on changes to his live set lists and stage banter during that period, framing certain moments as emotional or pointed. How much of that reflects a deliberate personal statement versus the normal variation that happens across a long touring schedule is genuinely difficult to verify from the outside, and it's worth treating those interpretations as reporting on public appearances rather than confirmed insight into his private feelings. Kidman, for her part, has largely avoided public comment on the specifics of the split, appearing at public events without her wedding ring in the months following the filing but declining to address the divorce directly in interviews or public statements. What the court documents do make clear is where both of their priorities landed once the marriage ended. The custody arrangement, giving Kidman the substantial majority of parenting time while preserving joint decision-making with Urban on major issues, suggests a negotiated outcome both parties found workable rather than one imposed through conflict in front of a judge. The waiver of spousal and child support, combined with the apparent prenuptial agreement protecting separate assets, points to a divorce handled through structured legal planning rather than an emotionally reactive split playing out in real time. For two people who built careers under constant public scrutiny, the relatively contained, low-drama nature of the legal proceedings stands out against the backdrop of how many other high-profile divorces have unfolded. There was no lengthy custody battle playing out across multiple court dates, no dueling public statements issued through representatives, and no protracted asset division fight of the kind that has defined other celebrity separations in recent years. It's also worth noting what separates this divorce from Kidman's first, very public split from Tom Cruise in 2001. In that case, custody of their adopted children primarily stayed with Cruise, an outcome that reportedly shaped how Kidman approached parenthood in the years since, according to her own past comments about that period of her life. This time, the documents show her securing primary residential custody of Sunday and Faith from the outset of the filing. A detail entertainment reporters have connected to her prior experience, though that connection is interpretation rather than something either party has stated directly on the record. What is documented, rather than inferred, is the outcome itself. Two children whose day-to-day home base will remain with their mother, with their father retaining a defined, protected role in the major decisions of their upbringing going forward. For Urban, the years since the marriage began unraveling were also a period of continued professional momentum rather than a visible slowdown. His touring schedule around the time of the divorce filing was substantial, with major tour dates continuing on essentially the same footing before and after the filing became public, suggesting his professional commitments were not significantly disrupted by the personal upheaval, at least not in terms of public-facing output. For Kidman, the years surrounding the divorce saw her continuing an unusually active run of film and television work, maintaining the kind of career pace that has defined her for decades, regardless of what was happening in her personal life. If anything, both careers appear to have continued largely on their own separate momentum, which is perhaps unsurprising given how much of their marriage was already built around managing two full-time, high-profile careers running in parallel. It's worth stepping back and asking why this particular divorce generated so much speculative coverage in the first place, beyond the obvious fact that two famous people were involved. Part of it is simply the length of the marriage. 19 years is a long time in any relationship, let alone one lived partly in public, and the ending of a relationship that long naturally invites people to look for a single dramatic cause, even when real marriages usually end for a combination of smaller, less cinematic reasons. Part of it is also the mismatch between the image the couple maintained publicly for years, one built around resilience and partnership, and the abrupt, businesslike tone of the actual legal filing.